I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to talk about Chapter 2 of The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir. This chapter is entitled Personal Freedom and Others. In Chapter 2, de Beauvoir outlines the human attitudes that betray our freedom. We may recognize ourselves and others in some of them, and this should give us pause to reflect on whether we are living authentic lives or play acting roles we never asked for and are not even interested in being, becoming the kinds of people we are repulsed by. She begins by looking at how childhood trains us to be immature. The unfortunate choices which most men make can only be explained by the fact that they have taken place on the basis of childhood, she writes. As children, we are thrown into the world, a world in which the child plays no role in creating. It hence appears as an absolute to which he can only submit. Nature, already existing human creations and conventions such as inventions, words, customs, and values, all seem inevitable to the child. While the child may play and carry out his activities, pursuing his own goals without impediment, he is able to do so only because they seem unimportant compared to those of the adults around him. These adults, such as parents and teachers, seem to him divine-like. Their rewards, punishments, praise and blame inculcate values in him of what is good or bad. Because of the protection of his caregivers and the lack of wider significance for his actions, the child escapes the anguish of freedom. They, however, do grow up to become their own persons. However, there are adults that do not escape the immaturity of the child, who become grown-up children because they are kept in servitude and ignorance. They are able to exercise their freedom but within the constraints of a world that has been set up before them without them. They are unable to affect and change their life's conditions. Her examples of such infantilizing of adults are slaves and women, where all they can do is to submit to what seems incontrovertible. Being kept in ignorance, they have no instrument, be it in thought or by astonishment or anger, which permits them to attack the civilization which oppresses them. They are unable to fight the patriarchy, though they are free to act within their confined situation. However, once there appears a possibility to enlarge their freedom to the extent enjoyed by free people, if they do not seize it, then they have resigned their freedom, making it their fault and hence rendering them blameworthy. However, for most others, it is rare that such infantilism continues into adulthood. Even as a child, one begins to see cracks in the authority of his adults, causing him to discover his subjectivity. This happens, for instance, when he acts contrary to the wishes of those adults and realizes that it is possible to disobey. He notices these adults' contradictions, hesitations, and weakness. They stop appearing to him like they are gods. He realizes that many aspects of the world that seem inevitable are merely contingent human artifacts, such as language, customs, ethics, and values. A moment comes when he takes his place among the adults, where his acts weigh upon the earth as much as those of other men. He will have to choose and decide. She calls this moment the crisis of adolescence, where the individual must at last assume his subjectivity, cast into a world which is no longer ready-made, which has to be made. Despite the possibility for change, a person's values remain deeply influenced by what has been drummed into him as a child. The easy choice will be choosing the status quo. In addition, many of our choices happen unconsciously before we can reason about it because of our conditioning. Nonetheless, we are responsible for our choices. Every man casts himself into the world by making himself a lack of being, writes de Beauvoir. As explained in Chapter 1, this refers to Sartre's ontology of the gap between being in itself, which we can never be, and being for itself, which is what we are and which strives to be a being in itself. A more pedestrian explanation is that we have desires we want to fulfill. They are not yet fulfilled, making them the lack de Beauvoir speaks of. To try to fulfill these desires, we act in the world. So by making a lack in ourselves, we are then motivated to fill the lack, and we do so by engaging in the world. The way we motivate ourselves is by investing our goals with significance, with value. We can choose goals that are more or less various, profound, and rich aspects of being, and what we choose depends on our vitality, sensitivity, and intelligence. Intelligence is about goodwill and matching our speech and acts to our capabilities. Sensitivity is how attentive we are to the world and ourselves. On vitality, Beauvoir writes, "There is vitality only by means of free generosity." Her example is Hermann Göring, a top leader of the Nazis. Vitality is defined in a dictionary as how lively and animated a person is, a term used to describe physical and mental vigor in a person. I suppose we would call such a person today dynamic and charismatic. Beauvoir thinks that among the three qualities, vitality is the most important. She terms those who are devoid of this living warmth submen, people who fear life because of life's risks and tensions, people devoid of passion. They aim low so that they are able to succeed in their projects. Because such a person sets a low bar, he discovers around him only an insignificant and dull world. This is a vicious cycle. The less he exists, the less is there reason for him to exist, since these reasons are created only by existing, describes Beauvoir. He is alive, but he is not really living. His timidity arouses the contempt of others. However, despite his timidity, he is not harmless. The subman hides behind labels, and to disguise his indifference, he will readily abandon himself to verbal outbursts or even physical violence. Beauvoir adds, "He realizes himself in the world as a blind, uncontrolled force which anybody can get control of. He is found in lynchings, in pogroms, in all the great bloody movements organized by the fanaticism of seriousness and passion, doing the actual dirty work. Yet no one, including the subman, can keep from existing. Even if we want to get rid of our ontological freedom, we must engage it positively. This leads the subman to mutate to be another creature Beauvoir loathes, the serious man. This person submerges his freedom in the content which he accepts from society in order to annihilate his subjectivity. The serious man internalizes and takes seriously the ready-made values of the world, which he had no part in creating, be it a cause, science, philosophy, revolution, etc. This is essentially an attitude of Sartrean bad faith, where the serious man gets rid of his freedom by claiming to subordinate it to values which would be unconditioned. I had earlier explained that unconditioned values are absolute ones, such as religious or ideological fundamentalism. The serious man allows someone else to do the thinking for him so as to escape the stress of existence. Beauvoir points out that while she cited causes and philosophy as serious topics for the serious person, the subject matter for a serious person need not be important ones. It can be trivial, her example being a woman who takes fashion very seriously. Hence, taking on the persona of the serious person is not just restricted to the subman. Even people who are not afraid of their lives and have not rejected their own existence can attempt to lose themselves in some object that they exalt. Since the world is not quite the way a serious person takes it to be, he must continuously renew the denial of his freedom to maintain his seriousness towards the exalted object he had chosen to devote himself to. The less economic and social circumstances allow an individual to act upon the world, the more this world appears to him as given, writes Beauvoir. The enslaved, the oppressed woman, and the powerless may be sincere in their seriousness because of their ignorance. However, she notes that there is often laziness and timidity in their resignation. Despite their situation, just as with the adolescent, there are cracks in the dominance others have over them that hints to them that they may have more freedom than they currently exercise, making it possible for them to raise themselves to a properly moral life. Others have a greater possibility of escaping the lie of the serious, but yet do not do so, in effect choosing it. Her examples are illuminating, for they reflect a rather common attitude even today. He is no longer a man, but a father, a boss, a member of the church or the party, she writes. By choosing in such a way, the serious people are in fact exercising their freedom to establish the value of their objectives, but they refuse to acknowledge that they are acting freely, which then mires them in bad faith. They may excuse themselves by thinking that they are acting usefully, but the term useful in itself has no meaning. It requires a complement, useful for this or that. They need to question what their objectives are useful for. The problem with the serious man's attitude of regarding his goals as absolute is that he makes these goals inhuman idols to which one will not hesitate to sacrifice man himself. This makes him dangerous and susceptible of becoming a tyrant. He dishonestly ignores the subjectivity of his choice, acting as if he has no choice, but is merely a tool of his goal. Because he considers his goal to be absolute, it overrides all other considerations, and hence he can then disregard the subjectivity and freedom of other people, willing to sacrifice them to the thing by persuading himself that they are worth nothing in comparison to the absoluteness of his goal. It is the political fanaticism which empties politics of all human content and imposes the state, not for individuals but against them, writes de Beauvoir. He regards only his own object as serious, while taking other people's objects as unserious. For instance, the colonizer may deem his empire to be important, but not the lives and happiness of the colonized, which the natives necessarily take seriously. He may even make jokes about them. De Beauvoir suggests the serious act in such a way because they are trying to disguise the incoherence of their choice. Another way to hide this incoherence is to flee. When the idolized object is not involved, the serious man slips into the attitude of the subman. He represses the life within him because he is not capable of existing without a guarantee, the guarantee seemingly offered to him by the object of his seriousness. He is nothing without his idol. For those whose job occupations are their idol, their lives become dull once they retire. Since fear is what causes the serious man to want to depend on his chosen object, prudence is then his top virtue because he wants to play it safe to avoid the stress of existence. His wish to have the world harden into a thing is belied by the very movement of life, writes de Beauvoir. He wants to get rid of his subjectivity and become an object, but that is not possible since we are living consciousnesses. He seeks justification for his life from external factors, which leads to absurdity according to the existentialists, who believe that justification for one's life can only come from within oneself. Because his goals are not grounded in his self, they become arbitrary and useless. For those who do feel the absurdity of their situation, being serious leads them not to the peace they desire, but instead disturbs them. Conscious of being unable to be anything, man then decides to be nothing, surmises de Beauvoir. They become nihilistic, ridding themselves of the anxiety of their freedom by denying the world and themselves. Nihilism is not their original condition. They may have earlier been optimistically participating in the world, but because it resulted in failure, nihilism becomes an attractive position to adopt. De Beauvoir outlines several more species of the nihilist. The demoniacal nihilist stubbornly maintains the values of childhood, of a society, or of a church in order to be able to trample upon them. He exercises his freedom by doing this, but it is a use of freedom in a negative sense, not as a positive liberation. The self-destructive nihilist takes on projects that he knows will fail or will harm the world. He may even deliberately sabotage his own projects. The nihilist has a will to negation, but this will to negate betrays itself since it must assume a positive presence when it surfaces. This means that this will is constantly in tension, requiring itself to continuously contradict the movement of existence. It may lead to suicide or self-destructive behaviors like alcohol or drug abuse. To save himself, he may flee back into the security of the Sirius. He rejects his own existence but also other people's existences because they, by their presence, confirm the nihilist's presence. This leads to a thirst for destruction, which then becomes a desire for power. He realizes himself by bringing nothingness into the world. De Beauvoir concedes that the nihilist attitude manifests a certain truth of the difficulty of coping with ambiguity, though they make a major mistake. The mistake is that it defines man not as the positive existence of a lack, but as a lack at the heart of existence, she explains. Human life is a positive existence, which in its positivity reveals that we lack our individual essence. This essence is not a given, according to existentialism. In Sartre's words, existence precedes essence. We overcome this lack by discovering and defining for ourselves our essence. Human life is not in itself a lack, a harm which needs to be annihilated in the same way we want to stamp out a virus. The nihilist is right that the world possesses no justification and that he himself is nothing. However, it is up to him to justify the world and to make himself exist validly. The world of facticity itself has no values. It is human beings that impute values to things, and it is up to us to give our lives value also. De Beauvoir comes next to a rather different species of nihilist, the adventurer, who retains a joy for life despite failing to find it meaningful. Readers familiar with Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus may recognize the adventurer as Camus' existentialist hero, who does not seek meaning since there is none, but seeks more experiences to fulfill his life. An adventurer does not shun things even though he does not believe in them, instead throwing himself into his undertakings with zest, though detached from the aims of those undertakings. He is indifferent to the contents of his project, but likes to conquer it, to have action for its own sake. Regardless of whether he succeeds or fails in his current undertaking, he throws himself into new undertakings with the same indifference and enthusiasm. He feels the ambiguity of existence not as a lack but positively. The adventurer is a dialectical synthesis of the nihilist and its antithesis of existence, suitable for a skeptic who is full of vitality. The adventurer does not find the justification of his life from things or activities, but takes pleasure in the sheer gratuity of existence. De Beauvoir's evaluation of such a character is that he could be existentialism's perfect hero if existentialism is solipsistic, which it is not since the world extends beyond the adventurer. Another criticism she has of the adventurer is that his adventurous attitude may not be pure. Some may have an underlying motive or goal, for instance, fortune or glory, which makes them serious men in disguise. Outwardly, they may proclaim their skepticism in regard to recognized values, but are busy pursuing their own success, rejecting the seriousness of those values, though he is serious about his own success. However, even a pure adventurer who lives for his own subjectivity will encounter others in his exploration, conquest, war, speculation, love, or politics. He may realize that to exert his own freedom, he has to be open to the possibilities the future may bring, and the way to extend his freedom is to also seek to extend the freedom of others. In that case, he will have to limit his own actions, which then gives his acts the content of seeking freedom for all. De Beauvoir then thinks that such a man should not be called an adventurer, a character which she views pejoratively, but a genuinely free man. For her, an adventurer is one who is indifferent to the content, that is, to the human meaning of his action, who thinks he can assert his own existence without taking into account that of others. He, like the nihilist, has a contempt for men, viewing them as instrumental, to be made use of to suit his purposes, which makes him an enemy to others. Because he needs money and power to succeed, he is obliged to serve the regime in order to obtain those. In pursuing his own independence, he then falls into servitude. She writes, "His fault is believing that one can do something for oneself without others and even against them." Then there is the passionate man. The passionate man, like the serious man, also sets up objects as idols, but unlike the serious man, does not view the object as detached and unattainable, but as disclosed by his subjectivity as part of his personality. A serious man may become a passionate man when the idolized object becomes an object of passion, and conversely, an object of passion, such as a loved one, can wither into merely a serious relationship. Real passion asserts the subjectivity of its involvement, explains de Beauvoir. The passionate man has a heartfelt desire in his movement towards the object of passion. In itself, it is not a bad attitude, since it populates the world with desirable objects with exciting meanings. However, this passion can become possessive, where he seeks to capture the other's being. In his focus, he may ignore what lies outside his project, the way a serious man does. Nothing can induce him to modify his choices, she notes. Such single-mindedness may be admirable but also frightening, since it may turn harmful, causing him to withdraw from the world or become an obstacle to other people's freedom. He too may become tyrannous, since only his project is precious to him and everything else is insignificant. Other people are once again merely instrumental, either useful or an obstacle, which may lead him to manipulate or betray them to attain his goals. He ignores their freedom. De Beauvoir observes that it is never nothing that one destroys. Finally, it may lead to fanaticism. There is no serious fanaticism which does not have a passional base, she notes. However, de Beauvoir sees a path to becoming a moral being from passion. The separation between the passionate man and his object is his source of torment. Instead of trying to extinguish his passion by devouring the object, he can reconcile his passion and his torment if he accepts that the distance separating himself and his object is the condition within which the object is disclosed. There must be a separation so that his object can continue to exist in the way it currently exists, which is the way he desires it. An example is a romantic relationship. If one subjugates one's partner, it may warp the partner's character, transforming the partner into someone else, which is not the character that one found desirable in the first place. It is only as something strange, forbidden, as something free, that the other is revealed as an other. And to love him genuinely is to love him in his otherness and in that freedom by which he escapes, she writes. Passion is converted to genuine freedom only if one destines his existence to other existences through the being, whether thing or man, at which he aims, without hoping to entrap it in the destiny of the in itself. If one's life is tied to the lives of others through his loved ones, then his passion for his loved ones leads him to freedom. His love does not cripple him or subjugate him, but frees him to feel solidarity with others. According to de Beauvoir, no one can be fulfilled by himself. We need others. However, this need for others creates ambiguity, uncertainty, and a risk of failure. By pointing out all these variants of the sub-man, de Beauvoir shows that trying to arrive at absolutes leads to disillusionment, tyranny, and harm. We cannot escape this world, which is an ambiguous world. Her solution is an ethical one. We must try to be moral beings. To do that, freedom must be our goal. A free man is one whose goals return him to the freedom that allowed him to establish his goals in the first place. Accomplishing the goal should give us more freedom. Freedom is not used up by the goal. To will freedom is to will that there be being. De Beauvoir says that such willing implies a bond between the willing individual and others. To make her point, she starts from egoism, where we want to achieve our being, our own freedom. Others then look like obstacles, like enemies, since we want everything. But this is a contradiction, since if I had everything, then there would be nothing else left to possess. We must then realize that while others take the world away from me, they also give the world to me. To be given something, I start by not having it. Someone else must have it to be able then to give it to me. For the world to have human significance, there must be humans in it to give the world significance. Our understanding of the world is defined relative to how others understand it. Freedom cannot will itself without aiming at an open future, writes Beauvoir. To be free, we have to accept the uncertainty of how the future will be. Only the freedom of other men can extend our ends beyond our life. Only the freedom of others keeps us from hardening in the absurdity of facticity, she adds. What is past becomes merely factual unless others keep our projects alive to give it a future. While our projects come from our subjectivity, they also go beyond our subjectivity by becoming actual in the world. We have a need to justify our existence and can only do so through other people. We cannot help but ask ourselves what the point is of what we do and what the point is of our lives. We worry about what concerns us, and what concerns us are other people because they affect us in the same way we affect other people. Our relationship with other people is inescapable. Hence, to will oneself free is also to will others free. Freedom is the basis and center of the ethics that Beauvoir is going to propose in this book. To live with others gives rise to difficulties, which is why we need an ethics. Thank you.